Hi, James from NCC here. Welcome to Chapter 2, LAN Technologies for the Network Plus course. In this module, we'll explore connection technologies, the building blocks of how devices physically connect in a local area network or LAN. Physical networks comes in many forms, copper, fiber, coax, but they all face similar challenges. To build or troubleshoot a network, you must understand how it handles signaling, channel access, data rates, and how physical media is used. In this module, you learn to identify signaling, modulation, and multiplexing methods, compare how different technologies share the channel, understand layer 2 standards like Ethernet frames and MAC addresses. Let's start with the most dominant LAN technology, Ethernet. Ethernet is used in nearly every modern wired network, not just LANs, but also in telecom, storage, and even wide area networks. Ethernet's dominance stems from its reliability, scalability, and widespread adoption across industries. Understanding Ethernet is essential for any network professional. Ethernet was created in the 1970s by Xerox and became an official standard in the 1980s as IEEE 802.3. Originally, it used coax cable with speeds of 10 megabits per second. Today, Ethernet supports up to 40 gigabit using twisted pair or fiber optic. Ethernet operates at OSI layer 1 and 2, which means it defines both the physical connection and how data is framed and sent. Ethernet isn't just a popular choice. It shaped the design of most network technologies, and that's why this module focuses on Ethernet. It's everywhere, it's scalable, and it's a solid foundation for learning how networks actually function. In the next section, we'll break down how Ethernet signaling works, including modulation, timing, how collisions are handled, and on a shared medium. Make sure you understand Ethernet basics because everything else in networking builds on top of this. What is signaling? Now, every type of physical network must turn digital data into a signal that can travel across a cable or through air. That signal method might be electrical, optical, or radio based, but either way, it has to represent ones and zeros. Understanding signaling is crucial for troubleshooting network issues and optimizing performance. Ethernet uses baseband signaling, also called line coding. It means that signal represents binary data, ones and zeros directly. The voltage or light level on the cable changes to represent each symbol. A symbol is a change in the signal that represents data, usually one or more bits. This direct representation makes baseband signaling efficient for local networks. Baseband encoding often includes a clock signal to keep timing accurate and prevent errors. Some encodings use multiple voltage levels, not just on and off, so each symbol can represent more than a single bit. Regardless of the encoding method, baseband transmission takes up the full bandwidth of the cable. When sending data over long distance, networks often combine data with a carrier wave, a basic signal like a radio or electrical current that's been modulated. Modulation means changing the wave, its amplitude, frequency or phase, to encode digital information. This is how modems got their name. They modulate and demodulate signals. When sending digital data over analog media, modems perform digital to analog conversion, breaking the data into signal samples and encoding them as analog waveforms. As shown here, binary data is turned into a wave before traveling through the medium. Baseband means one data stream per cable. Broadband means multiple channels, each at a different frequency, to send several data streams at once. Broadband is common in cable TV, DSL, and satellite and increases capacity by multiplexing channels. In casual language, broadband often just means fast Ethernet, but in networking, it has a more technical meaning. To recap, signaling converts data into physical signals, baseband sends data directly with symbols, modulation combines data with carrier waves, and broadband lets you send multiple streams on one medium. We'll break down two key concepts in networking: speed, bitrate, and bandwidth. Understanding these concepts is essential for network design and troubleshooting performance issues. You probably heard the term bandwidth used to describe how much data a network can carry. But in technical terms, it's more accurate to talk about bit rate, the number of bits transmitted per second. Now, bit rate is usually measured in megabits or gigabits per second. For example, 10 megabits or 1 gigabits per second. This measurement gives us a precise understanding of network capacity. Not all bits transmitted are useful. Gross bit rate includes everything, even error correction and headers. Net bit rate or throughput is the useful data after overhead is removed. A related term is goodput, which subtracts wasted time and network inefficiencies. Sometimes you'll see a connection described in baud rate instead. Now, baud rate is the number of symbols per second, not bits. If each symbol represents 1 bit, baud equals bit rate. But if each symbol carries 2 bits, like in modern systems, then baud is lower than the bit rate. Here's a diagram showing symbols carrying 2 bits each, like 00, 10, 01, and 11. Advanced encoding can use multiple tones, voltages, or shapes to represent more bits per symbol. For example, a 3200 baud signal uses 9-bit symbols, gives a bit rate of 28,800 bits per second. Your theoretical bit rate might look great, but real-world conditions reduce performance. Network congestion, configuration errors, signal interference, poor cable or long distance, multiple links at different speeds. The slowest link is the bottleneck. Even with correction, error cost time and reduce effective speed. Let's recap. Bitrate measures how much data a network can carry per second. Baud rate counts symbols, which may carry multiple bits. Throughput or goodput reflects the usable data that gets through. If you're still here, remember to give the video a like, subscribe to our channel. In the next section, we'll explain multiplexing, how networks combine multiple streams of data to share the same media. In a network, it's not just one device talking. Dozens of conversations may share the same cable, or even a single communication can include multiple data streams. Multiplexing is the process of combining multiple signals into one stream. A multiplexer or MUX or MUX handles this on the sending side. A demultiplexer or demux splits it back on the receiving side. Let's take this diagram. Many smaller lines are merged into one link, then separated again on the other end. Multiplexing happens at different network layers. It's common on a transport layer in software, but also happens physically, especially on WAN technologies. Multiplexing happens at different network layers, providing flexibility in how data streams are combined and managed across various network technologies. SDM or space division multiplexing uses multiple physical wires, like stereo headphone cables, using separate wires for left and right audio. It's simple and easy to understand, but can be bulky and expensive, and it doesn't scale well. FDM or frequency division multiplexing separates signals by frequency. For example, cable modems, TV channels, and some WAN connections use different frequencies to transmit multiple streams. Optical networks use a related method called wavelength division multiplexing or WDM, splitting light by color. TDM or time division multiplexing breaks signals into time slots and sends them in a quick rotation across the same cable. Even though it's one line, each signal gets its turn, like switching lanes on a racetrack. Digital phone systems like the T1 line uses TDM to carry 24 voice calls over one wire, and you never hear a delay. TDM needs precise timing so that MUX and DMUX stay in sync. To recap, multiplexing combines multiple data streams for efficient transmission. SDM, multiple cables. FDM, multiple frequencies. TDM, shared time slots. Next up, we'll look into the Ethernet framing and see how the MAC address helps identify how sending and receiving the data. Have you ever wondered how devices on a network know when and where to send their data? If the physical layer only handles the signal, who takes care of the addressing and the control? Remember, the physical layer just deals with sending a stream of bits from one end of the cable to another. It doesn't care who the data is for or how it's organized. But networks are more than just wires. You need logic to determine who can talk and when. That's where the data link layer comes in. The data link layer defines a logical network topology and ensures that devices can communicate clearly even when multiple clients are involved, like a busy office LAN. MAC, or Media Access Control, it manages physical connections to the network. It packages data into what's called a Layer 2 PDU or a frame. It negotiates multiple access, allowing different devices to share the same media. It assigns physical addresses, like MAC addresses, so each frame knows where it came from and where it's going. LLC, or Logic Link Control, handles multiplexing, letting multiple conversations share the same media, responsible for error handling, flow control, making sure that data arrives accurately and at the pace that doesn't overwhelm the recipient. In Ethernet LANs, this layer is mostly used just for logical multiplexing, as error handling is typically done at higher layers. Have you ever wondered how multiple devices talk to each other over the same network cable? That's where channel access comes in. It determines how data is transmitted between multiple devices across a network and how they share communication lines efficiently. Now, in a network, channel access is the method used to manage when and how devices send data. Now, there are two main challenges. Devices need to send data only when required, not all the time. Sometimes, more than two devices want to communicate over the same medium. And that's where duplexing helps us understand how devices handle traffic. Simple transmissions go from point A to B, and that's it. Think of a radio broadcast or a TV remote. Data flows one way only. But networks usually need duplex communication. Data needs to flow both ways. Let's break this down by type. Imagine a narrow bridge where cars can only pass in one direction at a time. Now that's half duplex. Devices take turns sending data using, or like a walkie-talkie. You talk, then I talk. Here, data flows in both directions, but not at the same time. Only one side can transmit, while the other waits. This kind of setup is simple, but has some downsides. If one side is slow or traffic is heavy, it creates delays. You can also lose packets if the timing is off. Now let's look at full duplex. Imagine that bridge now has two lanes, one for each direction. That's full duplex. Devices can send and receive simultaneously without waiting. But full duplex isn't always easy to implement. In big networks with many devices, adding separate communication paths for every pair becomes complex and expensive. So networks often simulate full duplex as much as possible, especially in shared environments. Half duplex, one way at a time, like a walkie-talkie. Full duplex, two way at the same time, like a phone call. The goal, keep data moving efficiently while reducing collisions and delays. Have you ever wondered how multiple devices share the same network without chaos? That's where multiple access techniques comes in. You've already seen how TDM, or time division multiplexing, is used to emulate multiple channels on a single link. It's like placing a traffic light on a one-lane bridge. Each direction gets a turn to travel on a timed basis. This approach works well for preventing collisions and allow multiple nodes to communicate. But there's a catch. The physical layer isn't very smart. It doesn't track who needs to send data or when. Every node needs to follow the same schedule, even if it doesn't have data to send. And that can waste time, especially if nodes are frequently added or removed from the network. To solve this, Layer 2 protocols introduce smarter solutions. One such method is called token passing. Instead of a fixed schedule, a special frame called a token is passed from one node to the next. When a node receives the token, it gets permission to send data, up to a certain limit. If it doesn't need to send anything, it passes the token immediately to the next node. This method is like a logical ring, and it can be used even in physical star or bus topology. Popular standards like Token Ring, Token Bus or FDDI use token-based systems, but these methods has issues. For example, if the token is lost, the network can stop functioning. Adding or removing nodes can break the flow. Despite these problems, they earned a reputation for high reliability when properly implemented. Modern technologies like Ethernet and Wi-Fi use a different strategy. Carrier Sense Multiple Access or CSMA. And here's how it works. A device first listens to the channel to see if it's already being used. This is called Carrier Sense. If the channel is free, it begins transmitting. If the channel is busy, it waits its turn. Now, CSMA alone can't stop collisions. Two devices might still send data at the exact same time. Now, to fix this, Ethernet adds collision detection. Now, that makes CSMA/CD. It's like crossing the road. If you first look left, then right, to make sure it's safe before crossing. If a collision is detected, the device stops, waits a random time before retrying. This random wait helps ensure that the same devices don't keep colliding. But in wireless networks like Wi-Fi, collision detection doesn't work well. Now that's because it's hard for a device to detect a collision while it's transmitting. Instead, Wi-Fi uses collision avoidance or CSMA/CA. And here's how it works. A device waits for a clear signal. It then sends a request to send message. The recipient replies with clear to send, and only then does the sender transmit the actual data. This method avoids most collisions before they happen. Even with CSMA/CD or CSMA/CA, collisions can still happen, especially as network grow and traffic increase. That's why managing network access remains one of the most critical parts of network design. Modern networks face unprecedented challenges. As more devices join networks and bandwidth demands skyrocket, even the best protocols struggle to maintain perfect order. Smart TVs, phones, laptops, IoT devices, and countless other gadgets are all compete for network resources simultaneously. And this is precisely why managing network access remains one of the most critical aspects of network design. Network administrators must carefully balance performance, reliability and scalability to ensure smooth communication across all connected devices. Understanding these limitations help network professionals design more robust systems and troubleshoot performance issues effectively. Imagine trying to deliver a mail without an address. It would be complete chaos. In networking, every device needs a unique identifier to ensure data reach its intended destination. Now at layer 2 of the OSI model, but a crucial identifier is the MAC address. While layer 1 simply pushes raw data bits across physical media without any sense of direction, layer 2 takes responsibility for intelligent data delivery. It needs to know just that data should be sent, but exactly where it should go to. This is where MAC addresses became the foundation of local network communication, serving as the postal address that switches a network interface card use the route frames accurately within a network segment. Now a MAC address, also known as a MAC 48, EUI 48 or just physical address, is a 48-bit number assigned to a network interface. Every Ethernet card, router port, Wi-Fi adapter or Bluetooth device has a unique MAC address, often set by the manufacturer. This makes MAC addresses the fingerprint of network hardware. No two legitimate devices should ever share the same address. Now MAC address is a 48-bit number that serves as a permanent identifier for network interfaces. Whether you're looking for or at a laptop's Wi-Fi card, a server's Ethernet port or a smartphone's Bluetooth adapter, each has its own unique MAC address burnt into the firmware. This addressing system ensures that when data needs to travel between devices on a local network, switches and other layer 2 devices can accurately forward frames to the intended recipient without confusion or misdirection. Now a MAC address is usually shown as a 12 hexadecimal digit, grouped into pairs of or for readability. You might see it written as 100D, 7F, F3, CE, 8F, or in a different format like 100D.7FF3.CE8F. The first 6 digits represent the Organizational Unique Identifier, or the OUI, which tells us who made the device. For example, 10:0D:7F might belong to Netgear. Now the last 6 digits, called the device ID, are assigned uniquely by the manufacturer. Sometimes you might need to manually assign a MAC address. That's called a locally administered address. When doing this, the OUI must begin with 02 to show that it's a manually configured and not set by the manufacturer. This system prevents custom addresses from conflicting with legitimate manufacturer assignments, maintaining network integrity and preventing addressing chaos. Virtual machines, network testing equipment, and some specialized applications frequently use logically or locally administered MAC addresses to avoid conflicts with physical hardware. Newer network types like IPv6 or FireWire need longer addresses, so they use EUI 64, a 64-bit physical address. Now, how does this work? It takes the 48-bit MAC address, then inserts FFFE in the middle, then flips the 7th bit of the OUI. This creates a unique 64-bit identifier that can work with IPv6 networks. This conversion process ensures that every IPv6 capable device can generate a unique interface identifier based on its hardware address, enabling seamless integration between Layer 2 and Layer 3 protocols while maintaining address uniqueness across the global internet. How does this conversion look visually? You start with a standard MAC address, and through a few simple steps, you get a EUI 64 address. This visual conversion demonstrates how legacy MAC addresses seamlessly integrate with modern IPv6 networks. The process ensures that billions of existing network devices can participate in IPv6 communication without requiring completely new addressing schemes. The beauty of this system lies in its backward compatibility. Existing network hardware doesn't need replacement to work with IPv6, making the transition to next generation internet protocols much more economical and practical for organizations worldwide. MAC addresses are not used for routing over the internet. They operate strictly at Layer 2, helping switches and NICs determine where to send frames within a local network. It's a crucial distinction that many network newcomers misunderstand. While MAC addresses are perfect for local network communications, like devices talking within your home or office network, they have no meaning beyond the local network segment. Internet routers use Layer 3 addresses, like IP addresses, to route traffic across the global internet. MAC addresses only matter for the last mile, delivery within each local network segment. Similar to how your home address matters for mail delivery, but the postal service uses sorting code or routing numbers to get mail between cities. Understanding this limitation helps network professionals design proper network architecture and troubleshoot connectivity issues more effectively. When sending data, we can use different addressing methods. Depending on your specific need, you might want to send data to one specific device, everyone on the network, or a select group. And that's where different addressing methodologies come into play. Now, a unicast address targets one specific recipient, just like sending a letter to one person. Think of a unicast address as the digital equivalent of sending a letter to one specific person. You write the name on the envelope, and the postal service ensures it reaches only that intended recipient. In networking terms, that means targeting one specific MAC address with your data frame. Now, a broadcast address, on the other hand, sends data to everyone on the network. Now, Ethernet uses all the Fs, which represent all ones, as its broadcast address. Perfect for DHCP requests, R queries, and network discovery protocols where a device needs to announce its presence to all the listeners. Critical network notifications that every device should receive, such as network topology changes or emergency shutdowns. While powerful broadcast traffic should be used judiciously. Too many broadcast messages can flood a network, degrading performance for everyone. Network administrators often implement broadcast storm control to prevent network paralysis. But sometimes we want to send data to multiple specific devices, not everyone, and that's where multicast comes in. Multicast addresses send data streams to multiple nodes, like streaming a live video to several viewers. These addresses follow specific rules, like having a certain hexadecimal digit or binary value. The beauty of multicast is that it sends one data stream that reaches multiple interested parties, dramatically reducing network bandwidth compared to multiple unicast streams. And finally, there's Anycast, a hybrid approach used in IPv6. It sends data to the nearest device in a group, not all of them. This is great for services like DNS, where you only need one reply, but from the closest server. Have you ever wondered what actually happens when you click send on an email or load a website? The data doesn't just magically appear at its destination. It travels in a carefully structured package called an Ethernet frame. These frames are the fundamental building blocks for layer 2 network communication. They're like a digital envelope that carry your data safely across local networks, complete with the addressing information, the actual payload, and built-in error checking mechanisms. Understanding frame structure is crucial for network troubleshooting, performance optimizations, and designing efficient network architecture. Let's dive into what makes these digital packages tick. When devices communicate on a network, they don't just send raw data, they send frames, structured packets of information that include addressing, data, and error checking. The most common type is the Ethernet Type 2 frame. It can range in size from 64 to 1522 bytes, and it includes 4 main parts: the header, payload, frame check sequence, and optional spacing. The header is the first part of the frame that contains essential delivery instructions, a 6-byte destination MAC address, where the frame is going, a 6-byte source MAC address, where the frame is coming from, an optional 802.1q tag for VLAN and priority control, and then a 2-byte ether type field, identifying what protocol is being carried, like IPv4 or IPv6. Next is the payload. This is where the actual data lives. It can be an IP packet, a ARP request, or any layer 3 content. Payloads can range from 46 bytes to 1500 bytes depending on the maximum transmission unit, or the MTU. But some networks support jumbo frames that can stretch up to 9000 bytes. At the end of the frame, there's a 4-byte frame check sequence, or a CRC. This is like a digital fingerprint used for error checking. The sending device calculates a checksum based on the frame's content. The receiving device rechecks it, and if it doesn't match, the frame is assumed to be corrupt. Between frames, Ethernet adds a small buffer of time called the inter-frame gap, and it's usually 12 bytes. And before the actual frame, there's an 8-byte preamble, which helps devices sync up. These aren't part of the frame itself, but they're crucial for smooth communication, especially in wired Ethernet networks. And that's it for today. Looking forward to see you in the next video. Stay safe.